Hello there, my name is Max, the Brilliant Buccaneer, and welcome back, to Kerbal Space Program. Now, after my last video on the Mars 2020 rover, I'll link to that down below by the way, I thought I would talk a little bit about the Atlas V rocket, its configurations, its history, and how it power slides off the launch pad when it launches. So, the Atlas V is the rocket which is going to be launching the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover at the end of the month. That's July, or possibly at the beginning of August. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about it, and then build some here in Kerbal Space Program. Now, the Atlas V is the most recent rocket from the Atlas family, and serves as the United Launch Alliance's workhorse alongside the Delta IV Heavy, which will both eventually be replaced by the Vulcan rocket currently in development, which is planned to debut sometime next year. Maybe I'll do a video on those two rockets, who knows. So the Atlas V was first launched in 2002, though the Atlas family dates back to 1957 with the Atlas missile. Originally the missiles were converted to launch satellites after the missiles hadn't been used, but the first dedicated launch vehicle using a Centaur second stage was introduced in 1963. There are two major types of Atlas V, the 400 series and the 500 series. That first number, the 4 or the 5, defines the diameter of the payload fairing, 4 or 5 meters. And the second and third numbers denote the number of strap-on solid rocket boosters and the number of engines in the Centaur upper stage, respectively. Now, all Atlas V's use the common core booster, that's the first stage bit of the main central stick, with a single Russian RD-180 engine. But there are options for 1 or 2 RL-10 engines on the Centaur upper stage, as well as a number of different solid rocket booster configurations to launch payloads at different masses. There was also a proposed Atlas V Heavy using 3 common core boosters. In my opinion, the most interesting thing about the Atlas V is the way the solid rocket boosters are laid out. Now, when it was first decided that SRBs would be needed, there was a bit of a small problem. There was a liquid oxygen feed line going down the side of the rocket, which meant that boosters couldn't be attached in certain places. So rather than undergo a costly redesign, they decided to just work around it, with the boosters positioned asymmetrically, and the main RD-180 engine gimbaling to keep the rocket upright, as opposed to the whole thing falling over, as you might expect. Now, all of the variants of the Atlas V make it a very versatile rocket. Some configurations are of course launched more than others, and some are technically offered but have never been launched at all. For instance, I mentioned earlier that there is an option for a dual Centaur upstage with 2 engines, with each of the booster configurations, or with a 4 or 5 meter fairing, but at the time of this recording, this has only ever flown once for launching the Starliner capsule, which of course used no fairing. So now I'll get on to building and demonstrating some of these in the game, talking a bit about their specs and the sort of thing they might be used for. So here in the vehicle assembly building, I'm building a simple test satellite / probe to launch on the rockets. This will be for all of the 400 series. I'm not intending for this to be super accurate in terms of payload capacity or orbital possibilities, but just a kind of visual aid really, to show you what the rockets look like. So built the fairing here and the Centaur upper stage with a single engine, and I'm going to use a twin bore engine for the first stage, the lower stage, because the RD-180 engine has 2 nozzles. It's just the one engine, but it has 2 nozzles. So yeah, we're about ready to launch. Just turning all the SAS on, make sure I've remembered everything, that it's not going to break. Here we go. So this 401 is by quite a large margin the most launched Atlas V, currently at 38 launches, which is more than 3 times any other variant. So it's the cheapest Atlas V variant at about $109 million, though it is not the variant with the lowest payload capacity. That's the 501, which takes a payload mass hit due to the larger fairing. I'll talk a bit about the 501 later and why you might use it. So obviously you can fit a bigger payload onto it, but if it's not any heavier, then you might run into a few issues. But there is one specific thing which I'll talk about later. So I'm just putting it into orbit here, nice circular orbit, roughly anyway. Fairly low orbit, which is what you'd expect, as it's not all that powerful. So here we go, just circularizing the orbit. So yeah, it just burns away, and we'll be in a nice, roughly circular orbit. and deploy the fairing. Okay, jump the gun a bit there. Yeah, deploy the fairing. Probably should have used the clamshell deployment to make it look a little more realistic, but you know. Here we go. No sophisticated payload attachment thing, it's just separators, very, very Kerbal. And here we go, here's the satellite in orbit. And yeah, so next I'm going to build the 431 and talk a little bit about that one. So this is a very, very simple change to the rocket, just attaching 3 solid rocket boosters, 2 on one side, 1 on the other. And the twin-bore main engine will gimbal to keep us upright. Just fiddling around with the position, and we're ready to launch. So this is the maximum number of solid rocket boosters you'll find on the 400 series. The 400 series has between 0 and 3 boosters, whereas the 500 series has between 0 and 5, to account for the heavier, or potential heavier payload masses. So this variant has only been launched 3 times. My assumption for this is that once you start needing this performance, your payload is large enough to need the 5-meter fairing. So we can put this one into a much higher orbit, as you can see here. So yeah, we're circularizing pretty high. So yeah, so you can see at the top here how high up we are. Almost at the moon, but not quite. Yeah, so I'm just going to deploy the solar panels, separate the stages, and I'm going to deorbit the second stage, just so I have to have stuff crowding around Kerbin in orbit. But I could just cancel it, but you know. Always nice to be environmentally friendly, even if it is only a video game. And here we go, face retrograde, and we'll just give it a little burn, and away we go. Right, so we are moving on to the 501. So I built a larger probe for this one, added some more volume and some more mass. And interestingly for this, for the 500 series, the fairing covers the Centaur second stage as well as the payload. My assumption for this originally was that it was to make the change in diameter more gradual, but it turns out it's as the Centaur stage wouldn't be able to support the weight of the larger fairing, so it has to come in below it. The first stage is the same. Yeah, and we're about ready to launch. So like I said earlier, this variant has the lowest payload capacity due to the larger fairing, and so isn't called upon all that often. But as far as I can see, 4 of its 7 launches have been used to launch the X-37 orbital test vehicle. So it's a pretty unusual payload, and so you know, they want to perhaps a less common launch vehicle. The other launches have been mostly government satellites, as far as I can see. So again, putting this one into fairly low orbit around Kerbin, and yeah, so we'll just do the old circularization burn. And so now we're into a nice 120 odd kilometer orbit, which is a pretty standard orbit, at least for me. So yeah, now I'll build some of the bigger 500 series. So moving on to the 541. Again, this is just a simple process of adding SRVs onto the side. You'll notice even with an even number of boosters, the thrust is unbalanced. The boosters aren't lined up as you might expect. So this variant is being used to launch the Perseverance Mars rover around the end of this month. So it's capable of launching interplanetary payloads. It's the second highest performing variant, or well, flown variant. We'll ignore the proposed heavy for now. And yeah, so we'll be able to put this one into quite a high orbit. Just deploy the probe, move on to the Centaur stage, and up we go. Yep, so moving it out past the moon. and circularizing out here. Yep, so you can see Kerbin there. Give it a little wave. Very far out. But not as far out as Minmus. We'll do that with the 551. Which we shall do momentarily. Right, so the big one. The 551. Also the second most flown variant with 10 launches. So 5 SRBs clustered around the base. Very simple modification, and we are ready to go. Up it goes, positively raring to go. Small explosion there, but it's fine. That doesn't happen on the roll. Fairing's glowing a bit here, very toasty. And we'll just deploy it. There we go. Yep, so here we go, moving out to a very high orbit, out past Minmus. To actually waste some performance here, we can get into a solar orbit with this. And here we go. Taking a look at the wider solar system. Loads of fuel left. So here we go. Here's the solar orbit we're putting it into. And circularize this one. Now I'll move on to some of the slightly more unusual variants, either flown or just proposed. Now this one is slightly different. It's only been used once to launch the Starliner crew capsule, designated the N22 as there is no fairing, 2 SRBs and 2 Centaur engines. The reason for the 2 Centaur engines is that it makes it safer for the crew, improves crew safety. So there are fewer what are called black zones in the launch where an abort could lead to the death of a crew. Scott Manning did a video on it a little while ago. I'll link to it in the description if you want to see a little more in-depth, better explanation of it. So you can see here I'm trying to work out which engines to use. I had to kind of put 2 on a bit dodgily. The stock KSP, which I was trying to keep it mostly stock, has some functionality for like bi-coupling engines, but they didn't seem to have the engines I needed. Yeah, so 2 SRBs, 1 on each side, still unbalanced as they all are. And here we go. Right, so yeah, we'll just get us into a relatively low orbit. Because you know, the Starliner will be taking crew to the ISS, that's in low Earth orbit. So we'll take this to low Kerbin orbit. Through the upper atmosphere. And here we go in space. Solar panels deployed. It's all looking lovely, going to circularize with 2 Centaur engines. See bits of booster drifting away, or, well, we're moving away. It's all relative, it's fine. So there we go, nice circular low orbit. Right, so now we're facing retrograde and burning ever so slightly just to take the apparatus down into the atmosphere, and we'll bring the capsule back down to Kerbin. So here we go. Going to retract the solar panels so they don't explode because of aerodynamic stress. really hotting up at the moment. And burn a little bit just to slow us down so we don't explode. Never mind the solar panels. Some interesting physics stuff going on here with the physics warp. Burning ever so slightly, just short little bursts. This wouldn't be how it works. I'm just bringing down the second stage because I think I can. You know, reusability and all that. Got the 4 parachutes coming out. And we're about to touch down. A little bit of burn just to slow us those last few meters per second. And only a few explosions, you know. Another one. There you go, it's fine. Everyone survived. So that's a successful landing in my book. So this is the last one, the really big one. The Atlas V Heavy was a proposed rocket you saw in one of the graphics earlier. The same fairing and upper stage as the 500 series, though there is the option for 2 Centaur engines, so this one would be designated the 5H1, because no solid rocket boosters, just 2 additional common core boosters strapped onto the side. So the same lower stage 2 in fact, just 3 of them strapped together. And I put some fuel lines on so that when they separate, the center stage will have a center, not Centaur. Center stage will still have full fuel. So with an estimated payload capacity of over 29 metric tons to low Earth orbit, it would have a higher payload capacity than a Delta IV Heavy. But now that ULA exists, this isn't needed. It's only slightly heavier and it's not worth the development work really. So separation, there's still loads of fuel, and we're going to extend far out past the Kerbin sphere of influence. So here we go, we're in an interplanetary space. And the orbit is just growing all the time. So yeah, extending the orbit out past Joule, that's the Jupiter proxy in the game. And circularizing it into a massive orbit that would take centuries to complete. So I could have sent this off into interstellar space like the Voyager probes, though of course they didn't take a direct route and visited several planets on their way. And that will be something in Kerbal Space Program 2, which I'm very excited for. So that's the end of the video. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please leave a like and do all the YouTube things. Comment, subscribe, bell notifications if you really want to. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.